You're nothing but a guest in your own home. Those words weren't shouted by a stranger, but whispered to me in my own dining hall, under the glitter of 1,000 lights, with family sitting around the table. That night, in the grand villa I had sacrificed my life to build, blood ties shattered. Because when love is absent, blood means nothing. And there I was, Margaret, a woman who had given her youth, her breath, her heart to this family, only to be told I was nothing but a guest in my own home. But what they didn't know was that the guest they dismissed had a silent plan. Before we dive into this storm of betrayal and justice, don't forget to subscribe to Her Betrayal Stories and ring the bell. Here you'll always find tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and twists no one sees coming. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment. Maybe the next story will echo your own life. 6 months earlier, the dining room glowed with warmth. My husband, Charles, beamed at the head of the table. My son, Daniel, returned from abroad with his new wife, Claire, sophisticated, confident, instantly adored. As they shared inside jokes, I refilled glasses quietly, invisible in my own home. Then came Claire's words, sugar-coated but sharp. "Don't worry, Margaret. We'll take good care of the estate for you. You don't have to trouble yourself anymore." That night, a seed of unease was planted. Soon, her charm turned into erasure. My portraits vanished from the walls, replaced with her taste. At meals, she said, "You don't have to cook anymore. Just let the caterers handle it." Charles agreed. Times change. Let the young ones lead. They thought they were being modern. But every smile hid a bruise, not on my skin, but in my spirit. And then, the blow I never expected. On Charles's desk, I found a draft will. My name, in parentheses, like an afterthought. The estate, the villa, the land, all listed under Daniel and Claire. In the margin, Charles had written, "Margaret is provided for. She doesn't need ownership." My hands shook. Provided for? Like a servant who had outlived her usefulness? That night, under the heavy summer air, I clutched the will and asked myself, after all these years, is this how my story ends? Erased? Replaced? If you were me, what would you do? Stay silent or rise? Because what happened next would shake the very foundation of this family. The following Sunday, the family gathered again. The table was heavy with dishes, though none made by my hands. Claire had insisted on hiring caterers, their polished trays and rehearsed smiles, replacing the warmth of meals once seasoned by love and sacrifice. I reached for the roasted chicken, an instinct I'd carried for years, the gesture of a mother feeding her family. But Claire's voice cut through the room. "Oh, Margaret, please. You don't have to serve yourself. Let Daniel do it. You've done enough in your life, right?" The words were honeyed, but the sting was sharp. The others chuckled politely, as though it was harmless. Daniel smiled, oblivious. Charles raised his glass as though in agreement. I forced a smile, but deep inside, I felt my dignity shrinking, piece by piece. Have you ever been in a room full of family, yet felt like you didn't belong at your own table? That was me, invisible in the very home I had built. That night, I set the table for two, a habit of decades. Charles had promised to dine with me. I lit the candles, placed the soup on the table, watched the steam curl and fade into the quiet. The minutes stretched, shadows lengthened, and then a message lit up my phone. "Busy with Daniel and Claire. Don't wait up." I stared at the empty chair across from me. Once upon a time, that chair had been filled with laughter, whispered plans, dreams of a future we built together. Now it was only absence. The silence of the house pressed on my chest, heavier than stone. In that silence, a realization bloomed. I was not a partner anymore. I was an afterthought. The next week, while Charles entertained business guests in the garden, I passed by with a tray of tea. The curtains fluttered, voices drifted through the open window. Claire's voice was clear. Honestly, Daniel, your mother has no real role anymore. Well, she's like the furniture. Respectable, but outdated. Laughter followed, polite, sharp, cruel. Even Charles did not protest. Instead, his familiar baritone joined the chorus. Don't be harsh. Margaret means well. She's just old-fashioned. She won't understand the way we run things now. My hands trembled, the porcelain cups clattering against the tray. Old-fashioned, outdated, like furniture. Furniture does not breathe. Furniture does not sacrifice decades of nights and mornings. Furniture does not bleed. I felt the sting of tears, but I refused to let them see. I would not cry where their laughter could pierce deeper. No, I would bleed silently, and plot silently too. Have you ever heard words that stripped you of your worth, not from enemies, but from those you raised, those you trusted? If you have, know this: you are not alone. One evening, I noticed my mother's pearl necklace, the one I had kept safe for decades, was missing from the jewelry box. My heart pounded as I searched, knowing every corner, every drawer. It was gone. I asked Charles gently. His response? A shrug. Then Claire's voice drifted in, careless, sharp. Oh, Margaret, I borrowed it for a dinner party. It looked much better on me anyway. Don't worry, it's safe. No apology, no permission asked, just entitlement, dressed as charm. My breath caught in my chest. That necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was my mother's memory, the last thing she pressed into my hands before passing. To her, it was an accessory. To me, it was blood and bone. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but inside me, storms gathered. My fists clenched. Something inside me shifted. Not just hurt, but resolve. 2 days later, while the family believed I was visiting a friend, I stepped into a quiet office downtown. The ticking clock on the wall echoed louder than my footsteps. Mr. Harper, an old lawyer and family acquaintance, welcomed me with surprise. Mrs. Whitmore, he said kindly, I was surprised by your call. I laid the draft will on his desk. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. Tell me, Mr. Harper, what rights do I have left? Am I truly just a guest? He studied the papers, his brows knitting together. Then he looked up. This is only a draft. Nothing is final, and from what I see, your contributions, both financial and personal, give you a stronger claim than they imagine. I exhaled, the weight in my chest loosening slightly. For the first time, I glimpsed a truth. I was not powerless. Before I left, Mr. Harper handed me a folder. Keep this safe. These are records of the initial property deeds, all signed with your name alongside Charles's. It may matter one day. I clutched the folder as though it were oxygen. Walking back home, the villa loomed large before me. Once it had been a castle of safety. Now I saw it for what it was, a battlefield, and none of them even knew war had begun. As I crossed the threshold, Claire's laughter rang from the living room, mingling with Charles's approving voice. Their harmony sounded almost rehearsed, like a performance meant to erase me. They believed I was fading, irrelevant, erased. But in my hands, I carried proof that the story wasn't theirs to write alone. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. For years, I had seen a woman worn down by duty, bent by sacrifice, fading into the background. But now, in the reflection, I saw someone else. Not a victim, not furniture. A woman holding a secret. A woman holding a plan. The question was no longer whether I would endure. Endurance was no longer enough. The question was when and how I would strike back. Morning arrived with a contrived softness. I brewed tea, then opened Mr. Harper's folder. Deeds, receipts, a prenuptial addendum naming me co-owner of major assets acquired after our 10th year. Claire's heels tapped a proprietary rhythm down the hall. She entered the kitchen without looking. "The caterer needs the wine cellar," she announced. "Sorting old papers, Margaret?" "Let housekeeping manage that." "We have a schedule." I closed the folder gently. "Some things," I said, "are mine to sort." When Charles modernized the villa, we installed a discreet security system, cameras at entries, and, at my insistence, an archival drive behind a false panel in the pantry. No one remembered because I never reminded them. A house remembers what people try to forget. I cued recent footage. Claire arrived late, cradling a velvet case I recognized as my mother's pearls. Daniel watched, hesitant, then looked away when she set the case, carelessly, on the guest room dresser. Charles, on the patio, whispered into his phone. "Move it to the auxiliary account." She doesn't track statements, that firm mouth, deciding my future without asking. I downloaded clips and saved copies to the encrypted drive Mr. Harper provided. If you were me, what would you archive first? The insult, the theft, or the indifference? Evidence has its own music. Crisp pages, cold numbers. Mr. Harper referred me to a forensic accountant, Ava Morales. We met in a quiet library corner. I handed the folder, a list of recurring transfers I'd long dismissed as business logistics, and a new list, boutique charges Claire made on a shared corporate card. I told myself I was being small, I confessed. Suspicious. Self-doubt is their favorite accountant, Ava replied. Let's see whose story adds up. Charles's birthday approached. Perfect for quiet theater. Claire curated a garden soiree of twinkle lights and practiced laughter. I wore a simple navy dress and my mother's pearls, retrieved without a word from Claire's dresser the night before. They rested at my throat like homecoming. Claire circled. "Those look vintage." "They are," I said, touching the clasp. "Some things don't go out of style." Charles's toast praised Daniel's vision and Claire's elegance, then thanked me briefly for keeping the hearth warm. Later, I slipped into the study and placed a notarized notice of my co-ownership rights between his cigar cutter and a photo from our lean years, the last time he asked what I dreamed of. Near midnight, Daniel left his phone on the patio table. A message from Claire bloomed across the lock screen. "We move fast after the board vote. Your father will support us. Margaret won't know until it's done." I didn't touch the phone. The moon did the reading for me. Daniel returned, saw the screen, then me. "Mom," he said, uncertain. "You're up late." "Some flowers. Only open in the dark," I answered. "If you rush them, you miss the perfume." He seemed relieved I asked nothing. When the child you raised stands at the edge of someone else's plan, do you grab his hand or set a boundary and let consequence teach? Each morning I recited the truths my house refused to say. I am not fragile. I am not furniture. I am not a guest. I wrote them in a small notebook and tucked it beside the archival drive. Ava's updates braided into a lattice. Transfers to an auxiliary account. Boutique purchases masked as client relations. Evaluation of the villa suspiciously below market. Useful if someone wanted a fast sale to an allied buyer. She forwarded a memo from Charles's advisor proposing a restructuring to move the estate into a family entity with Claire as primary signatory. "Not illegal," Ava said, "just opportunistic. Unless you can show intent to deprive a co-owner." "I can show intent," I replied, glancing at the banker call on pause. "And I can show pattern." I hosted tea for the household staff, something Claire rarely bothered with. We spoke of families and rising costs. Then, gently, I asked about comings and goings. June, the head housekeeper, met my eyes. There were appraisers last week. They measured the dining room, the study, the east wing. Mrs. Clare said it was insurance. Did they inspect the pantry? I asked. Yes, she said, surprised. They didn't find anything unusual. Good, I said, and poured more tea. If you feel powerless in your home, remember, walls hear, floors witness, and people notice. Dignity invites allies. Sunday dinner returned, stubborn and familiar. We have news, Claire announced. Charles gleamed. Before they spoke, I laid small envelopes beside each plate. A bit of housekeeping? I smiled. Open yours. Inside, excerpts from original deeds with my initials, printouts of transfers, and a letter in my hand. I love you. I have stood with you. I will not stand aside for you. Charles stiffened. Claire's eyes flashed. Daniel looked between us, comprehension flickering like a flame. Mother, he asked softly, what is this? Facts, I said, and a reminder. Respect isn't inherited. It's practiced. Claire laughed too brightly. This is dramatic, Margaret. Drama, I answered, is a ceremony for truths people refuse to speak plainly. My phone buzzed. Mrs. Whitmore? This is Hannah. We met at a charity brunch. I dated Daniel before he married Claire. She asked me to keep some things about Daniel quiet, and in return she'd introduce my startup to Charles. It felt wrong. I said no. Thank you, I said. Would you write that down? I'm tired of carrying other people's secrets. I watched dawn soften the hedges. My reflection steadied. The plan had shape now. Documents, footage, a witness, a paper trail, a lawyer, an accountant, a house that remembered. I whispered to the quiet, you mistook my patience for absence. That ends now. Before I slept, I wrote 3 lines and left them on my nightstand. Stand firm, speak plain, document everything. To those listening tonight, if you've ever been minimized in your own home, what proof would you gather first? Power often changes costumes, but paper keeps its face. Tomorrow, I would no longer whisper. At all. It was a Sunday evening, the kind that once meant roast chicken and hymns of routine. But this Sunday, the dining table gleamed like a courtroom bench. The chandelier above threw harsh light, illuminating every glass, every wrinkle, every secret about to be dragged into daylight. Charles called the meeting. Claire perched beside him, elegant in silk, chin lifted like a queen holding trial. Daniel shifted uneasily, his hands restless on the polished wood. Margaret, Charles began, voice smooth as polished oak. We've made decisions for the good of the family. Daniel and Claire will oversee the estate's restructuring. You needn't worry. You'll be comfortable, always comfortable. That word again, like a cage disguised as kindness. It wasn't generosity. It was dismissal, wrapped in silk. I leaned forward, sliding a thick folder across the table. The sound of paper against wood sliced through the air like a blade. Before you finalize, I said evenly, perhaps review these. Inside, deed copies with my signature, Ava's financial analysis, and transcripts of Claire's boutique charges. The air thickened. Pages flipped, faces drained. Charles's lips parted, color draining from his cheeks. Where did you? He started. From the home I built, I interrupted, and from the paper you forgot I could read. Claire laughed, brittle as glass about to shatter. This is petty. You're clinging to scraps of paper. Everyone knows Charles built this fortune. You just polished silverware and played hostess. My throat tightened, but I steadied myself. I was more than a hostess. I was the ledger, the nurse, the silent partner. I was the sacrifice behind every triumph, and the law remembers what you choose to forget. She stood abruptly, knocking over her glass. Red wine bled across the documents like spilled blood. Daniel's eyes flicked between us, his mother holding firm, his wife unraveling. "Mom," Daniel whispered, "why didn't you say anything before?" "Because love asks for patience," I said softly. "But patience has been mistaken for weakness." His gaze faltered. He looked at Claire, whose lips pressed thin with fury, then at Charles, whose silence confessed more than words ever could. I reached into my bag and produced a small USB drive. Its metal glinted under the chandelier. "One more thing. You may find the footage enlightening." Charles shifted uneasily. Claire scoffed. "What footage?" With a click, the living room screen lit up. Security recordings rolled. Claire setting my mother's pearls on the dresser, saying they looked better on her. Charles whispering on the phone, "Move it to the auxiliary account." She doesn't track statements, appraisers measuring walls behind my back, pens scribbling values into ledgers. The silence was deafening. Only the flicker of the screen filled the room. Finally, I spoke. "This villa? It bears my name on the deed. And you," I turned to Claire, "are trespassing when you treat it as your kingdom." If you were sitting at this table, watching betrayal unfold in front of your own child, what would you do? Would you shout? Would you forgive? Or would you, like me, choose clarity over chaos? Claire's face flushed crimson. "Daniel, tell her. Tell her this doesn't change anything. We're the future. She's the past." But Daniel didn't move. His eyes brimmed with conflict, then something like shame. "Claire," he said softly, "maybe we should slow down." Her expression hardened, voice shrill. "Slow down? After everything I've done for you? For us? Don't you dare turn on me now." The room fractured. Loyalty splintered in every direction. Charles cleared his throat, grasping at authority. "Margaret, you've misunderstood. These were business precautions. Of course you're valued. But the world changes. Women like Claire bring modernity. You—" I raised a hand, sharp enough to silence him. "Enough. You speak of modernity, yet your methods are ancient. Diminish the wife, exalt the mistress of appearances. I won't vanish quietly." I revealed a letter sealed by Mr. Harper. The sound of wax tearing echoed like a gavel strike. "Filed yesterday. A petition for legal affirmation of my co-ownership. Any transfer, sale, or restructuring without my consent is null. If you continue, you invite courtrooms instead of living rooms." Claire paled, her bravado draining. Charles slumped, his shoulders folding inward. Daniel covered his face with his hands. "Consider this," I said. "If I were furniture, as you claim, you would not need to strip me of rights. But because I am more, because I am equal, you fear my name, on every document." Just then, the heavy front door opened. Karen, Charles's elder sister, stepped in unannounced. Her heels struck the marble like a verdict. "I couldn't ignore the rumors," she said, her eyes sharp. She scanned the table, the spilled wine, the trembling hands. Then her gaze settled on me. "Margaret," she declared, "you are right. I knew from the beginning these assets were joint. Charles may forget, but I won't." Her words landed like stone dropped in water, sending ripples through every heart at that table. Claire's mask cracked. Claire pushed back from the table, her chair screeching. "This is absurd. Daniel, you're mine. You promised we'd lead together." Daniel stood slowly, his voice low but clear. "I promised to love with honesty, and I've been blind." But not anymore. Claire's chair scraped harshly as she stormed out, heels echoing like retreating drums. Charles muttered, bitterness coating his words. "You've ruined everything, Margaret." I looked at him, the man I had once loved fiercely. His shoulders slumped, his empire crumbling in his own hands. "No," I said firmly. "I've restored what you tried to erase." For the first time in years, I felt air expand fully in my lungs. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't begging. I was simply stating truth, backed by law, by memory, by evidence. And in that truth, the villa itself seemed lighter, as if the walls had sighed with relief. The chandelier didn't blind. It illuminated. The air didn't suffocate. It carried promise. Have you ever watched someone twist your sacrifices into chains, and then felt the moment you cut those chains with one sharp truth? That moment is not revenge. It is reclamation. As silence reclaimed the table, Karen placed a hand on mine. "This is far from over," she said. She was right. Claire would not retreat easily. Charles's pride would not surrender quickly. And Daniel's torn loyalties still flickered uncertain. But for the first time, I was no longer on trial in my own home. I was the one writing the record. And soon, the world beyond these walls would know the story. The morning after the confrontation, the villa was strangely quiet. No clinking glasses, no high heels echoing on marble floors, no booming voice from Charles announcing family business. Only sunlight spilling through tall windows, painting everything in a softer hue. The silence itself felt like an intruder, walking through hallways that had always known chatter, footsteps, and the sound of authority. Claire had left in a flurry of rage the night before. Charles retreated to his study, silent, avoiding my gaze. Daniel, torn and trembling, stayed upstairs, his footsteps restless through the night. But me? For the first time in decades, I sipped tea, not as a servant of peace, but as the rightful mistress of my own life. The taste was the same, yet everything about it was different. Within days, Claire's plan unraveled. The boutique charges, the auxiliary accounts, the recorded whispers, all in Ava's neat reports, reached the board of Charles's company. Suddenly, Claire was no longer the dazzling daughter-in-law, but a liability. Contracts froze. Business partners whispered in corridors where once her name drew admiration. Her laughter, once magnetic, now carried the metallic taste of scandal. Charles's face, always proud, sagged with humiliation as calls came in, one after another. He tried to control the narrative, but the documents were undeniable. His empire, so carefully curated, was cracking at the edges. And Daniel? He sought me out, eyes red, voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't see it. I didn't want to. I let her speak for me, even against you." I'm sorry I held his hand. His palms were cold, like a child caught between shame and awakening. "We all grow blind when love turns into worship," I told him gently. "The lesson is not to never trust, but to learn where to draw the line. And you, my son, will learn." Karen, once distant, became an unexpected ally. "Margaret," she said, "you've endured more than most would. You reminded us that silence can be dignity until it becomes erasure. Then silence must break." She organized a small gathering at the church. There, I shared my story. Not as gossip, but as testimony. Other women came forward. One spoke of a husband who shifted property into his brother's name. Another whispered of children who sold her jewelry while she slept. A widow described how she was treated like a burden in her son's house. The room filled with nods, tears, and finally, applause. What began as confession turned into solidarity. In that moment, I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror many were afraid to hold, a reflection of wounds too familiar, yet too often silenced. One evening, I walked through the villa, touching the frames Claire had removed. I rehung some portraits, not all, just enough to remind the walls who truly lived here. The faces of ancestors, the image of Daniel as a boy with his violin, a picture of myself and Charles in simpler days. In the garden, the roses bloomed untended. I trimmed them myself, hands steady. Each thorn, each petal felt like truth. Beauty and pain, inseparable, coexisting as life itself. Daniel joined me, standing awkwardly at first. "What will happen now?" he asked. I looked at the horizon, the sky washed in pink and gold. "Now, we live with honesty. If your father chooses pride over peace, that's his path. If Claire returns with schemes, the law will answer her, not me. As for me," I pressed the shears into the earth. "I will never again ask permission to exist." A week later, Claire returned, fury sharp in her voice. Her car screeched to a halt in the driveway. She stormed up the steps, eyes blazing. "You can't do this." "I won't be erased." I met her at the threshold, the very door she once paraded through like a queen. "This villa," I said calmly, "is not yours to rule. You built no walls here, sacrificed no knights, buried no elders. You treated me as a relic. But relics, Claire, carry power. And mine is written into every deed, every page of law, every memory this house contains." She spat bitter words and turned away. That was the last time she crossed my gates. Charles lingered, pride broken, his empire crumbling under scrutiny. The man who once stood like marble now looked like clay in the rain. One night he muttered, "You've shamed me." "No," I replied, voice steady as stone. "You shamed yourself when you chose ambition over respect. I merely refused to hide it." He lowered his gaze. For the first time in our long marriage, he looked smaller than I ever imagined. His silence was no longer power. It was defeat. I felt sorrow. Yes, but not regret. Sometimes justice is not loud. It is quiet clarity. Have you ever been told you were too old, outdated, or just a guest in the life you built? If so, hear this. You are not invisible. Sacrifice is not weakness, and silence is not consent. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have walked away? Or would you, too, have chosen to reclaim your ground? Months passed. The villa no longer felt like a battlefield. Instead, it was a sanctuary again. Not perfect, but honest. I began hosting weekly teas for neighbors and widows, women whose stories were often silenced. We sat under the same tall windows, once heavy with judgment, now open to laughter. Together we shared sorrow, strength, and small victories. Daniel visited often, more humble now, learning to separate love from manipulation. Karen became a steadfast companion, reminding me that family could be rebuilt on respect, not just blood. Even Charles, humbled by loss, showed occasional glimpses of the man I once married. Softer, quieter. But my happiness no longer depended on him, or on anyone's approval. One evening, as the sun dipped, I stood in the garden, pearls at my neck, the house glowing behind me. I whispered, "Respect isn't given by blood. It's earned through love and kindness. And when kindness is replaced with contempt, justice must take its place." And to you, watching this story unfold, remember, no one should endure erasure in their own home. If you've lived through sacrifice and betrayal, your voice matters. Share your story in the comments. Have you witnessed or lived through similar injustices? Here, every tale is a reminder. We are not alone. Together, we speak for dignity, for fairness, for healing. If this story touched you, leave a message, even just one line to yourself. And don't forget to subscribe to her betrayal stories to witness more journeys of sacrifice, betrayal, and the unexpected victories of women who refuse to disappear. Because in the end, betrayal does not have the final word. We do.